Welcome to God Connection, where we discover spiritual truths concealed in life's most traumatic times. Have you ever experienced the frightening conclusion that the person you committed your heart, trust, and allegiance to was covertly planning your demise? Imagine realizing that their compassion was a ruse, their support was a tactic, and their love was the bait in a huge trap that made even uninvolved spectators extremely uncomfortable. This is not about basic backstabbing. It would be much too normal and banal. No, this was a painstakingly planned, slow-cooked, gourmet betrayal marinated for months, if not years, in intentional deception before being served cold with a side of public humiliation aimed to crush your very soul. The most dangerous thing in the world is not a lie, but the awful truth you discover much too late. They sought to destroy you, but they made a catastrophic mistake. They didn't recognize they were fighting a heavenly destiny rather than a human. What they planned to be your execution became the setting for your coronation, and the world is about to find out why. Number 1. You survived a level of treachery that would have turned most people into the monsters they faced. You survived a level of treachery that would have transformed most people into the monsters they were fighting. Allow that phrase to sink in, because it is not an exaggeration. It is the unadulterated reality. There is a pain threshold, a tipping point at which betrayal becomes so intense, so soul-crushing, that it starts to profoundly rewire a person's whole existence. It's a poison that creeps into a person's spiritual lifeblood, affecting their thoughts, speech, and perception of the world. Many people who pass this barrier never fully recover. They lose sight of who they once were, exchanging their spark for a harsh shell of cynicism. Their hearts become stone fortresses, impermeable to all compassion and real love. Bitterness becomes the natural language they speak, permeating every word and contaminating every encounter. Suspicion becomes the prism through which they see each new connection, always looking for the next anticipated betrayal. They wrap themselves in so many layers of self-protection that they finally suffocate the very life they're attempting to maintain, ceasing to exist and just living in a state of constant defense. In the most sad and heinous situations, they reach a harsh conclusion. The only way to live in a cruel world is to follow the same nasty, vicious rules as those who violated them. They become a mirror of their tormentors. But you didn't do it. And that one strong decision is exactly what makes your tale so horribly disturbing for some and tremendously inspirational for others. They watched you take hit after hit, each intended to be the ultimate, crushing strike. Onlookers, particularly your adversaries, held their breath, thinking, this is it. This will be the moment they finally snap. This is when the mask of civility falls and the beast of vengeance emerges. But that moment never came. The expected explosion never happened. You did not become callous in your anguish. You did not enter their domain of mudslinging and character assassination. You refused to concoct intricate vengeance plots like a deranged soap opera character. Crucially, you did not eat their poison in order to spit it back at them and win the battle. In a world that demanded that you transform into a monster in order to battle another, you stayed stubbornly, miraculously human. And, let it be known, it is not a normal reaction when the agony is so severe. It is supernatural. What makes this even more relevant is that the folks in your circle were aware of how awful things had become. They saw the humiliation campaign, saw the real losses you experienced, and knew about the restless nights when your mind was a battleground. They saw the suffering you couldn't always express, how it sapped the brightness from your eyes and the vitality from your soul. More than that, they saw the many possibilities before you to lash out, react, and expose them in the most destructive manner possible, and no one would have blamed you for it. Society would have praised it as justifiable vengeance. Nonetheless, you continually exercised restraint. You kept your peace. That kind of self-control is tremendously disconcerting to the typical person because it requires them to look in the mirror and ask a truly unpleasant question. If that were me, could I have done the same? The honest, silent response for the majority is a resounding no. They would have allowed that betrayal to utterly transform their identity, to rip apart their moral compass and replace it with a new, darker code. But you refuse to allow the deep darkness of another person's soul destroy the holy light inside your own. That is why survival is more than just breathing and having a heartbeat. It's all about being true to yourself. You didn't simply survive the disaster. You emerged entire, with your integrity and soul intact. That is a level of triumph that most people will never understand, since it is not about beating the opponent. It's about a steadfast unwillingness to lose yourself in the process. That is the type of survival that leaves decent people in mute amazement and your adversaries absolutely enraged that their most potent weapon, their own darkness, was ineffective against you. Number 2, their betrayal wasn't just against you. It was against everyone who believed in humanity. The betrayal you experienced was never just a private conflict between you and your foes. It was a public attack on the premise that humans are inherently decent. When an act of such premeditated brutality occurs in the shadows, out of sight, it might be disregarded as a terrible but rare episode, an outlier in an otherwise nice society. However, when it occurs in broad sight, in front of your whole society, it does considerably more than just injure the individual at the center. It causes a shockwave, a spiritual vibration that spreads across the community, shattering its feeling of safety, fairness, and justice. People who had built their lives on the foundation of loyalty suddenly felt the earth move under them, calling into question every commitment they held dear. Individuals who took pleasure in their ability to read people's personalities and distinguish between friends and foes started to seriously question their own judgment. It wasn't just your heart that was broken. It was the communal belief in decency that left a severe, bleeding wound. This specific betrayal made individuals literally sick to their stomachs, not because it was nasty, but because it was premeditated. The cold, systematic, long-term planning that underpins it compels every spectator to face a scary reality. Evil isn't necessarily a noisy, growling creature with conspicuous horns and tail. Evil sometimes wears a familiar grin for years. Sometimes it gives you coffee, inquires about your family, and praises your accomplishments, all while discreetly planning your doom. That is a difficult fact to accept for those who have built their life and feeling of security on the assumption that they can discern the difference, that they will know if danger is standing right next to them. This is where the harm is deeper than most people realize. Your society saw you as more than simply a victim. You were a symbol. You represented something people badly needed to think was still safe and precious in this world. True trust, steadfast love, and real friendship. Whatever the nature of your link with your betrayer, seeing it so brazenly and shamelessly abused was, to many, like witnessing the final light in a dark room intentionally extinguished. The tragedy was not just what they did to you. It was the terrible message their acts communicated to everyone. That no bond, no matter how strong it looks or how long it has been cultivated, is genuinely immune to the rod of treachery. The worst aspect for many of those watching was the abrupt, terrible understanding that they, too, might have faced a similar end. Seeing it happen to you, someone they knew and respected, set off a paranoid reaction in their minds. It made them mentally go over every recent discussion, every promise someone had made to them, and every slight change in behavior from their own inner circle, wondering with sickening dread whether their own camp had a traitor silently collecting notes, waiting for the right time to strike. You unintentionally became live evidence that no one is really untouchable. That is why it was always larger than you. Your anguish was very personal, but the consequence was devastatingly public. This treachery drove people to recognize that darkness may be there by you, smiling and affirming you, while patiently scheming your complete ruin. And, although that fact is deeply disturbing, it is also the reason your survival shocked them to their core. Because, in a world full of such deceit, you stood as a stubborn witness to the fact that it is still possible to withstand it, come out on top, and, most remarkably, do so without becoming the same heartless creature who attempted to kill you. Number 3, they were betting on the collapse of your mind, not just your life. Let's be clear, their goal was never just to tear you down. Their intent was considerably more dark and diabolical. They intended to thoroughly disassemble you from the inside out. Their ultimate purpose was never just to sabotage your prospects, destroy your reputation, or disrupt your life. That would have been too straightforward, too compassionate in their warped minds. What they genuinely want, and what they were diligently working toward, was to observe your sense of self shatter and disintegrate in public. They wanted you to lose track of who you were to the point where you couldn't recognize yourself in the mirror. This was not a physical assault on your life. It was a psychological warfare operation, painstakingly planned to obliterate you while leaving your body as a hollowed-out shell, a phantom of your previous self. They were relying on a very particular psychological principle, that a substantial and persistent dosage of humiliation, isolation, and stress would always lead to mental breakdown. They analyzed you, identified your pressure spots, and administered force with surgical precision. Once that collapse happened, they would have had entire control over the narrative. They could then turn to the world with feigned concern and say things like, "We tried to warn everyone, but they were always unstable," or "this bitterness and self-destruction was always inside of them." People would believe it because you were too broken, too lost in a fog of trauma and confusion to effectively defend yourself. That demonstrates how thorough, meticulous, and chillingly deliberate their approach genuinely was. They weren't just trying to inflict a wound in the moment. They were attempting to permanently and irreversibly damage your legacy, rewriting history with you as the villain in your own tale. What makes this even more bizarre is that they designed the whole situation to seem as if your collapse was all your fault. The trap was ingeniously, diabolically simple. Repeatedly push, agitate, and torture you until you erupted in wrath or despair. At that exact moment, they would take a step back, dust off their hands, and play the role of the innocent victim, saying, "See? Look at how they truly are. This is who they've been all along." They wanted to bait you into becoming the very unstable caricature they had been secretly painting for everyone behind your back. And if you had fallen for it, if you had given them that outburst, they would have had all the evidence they needed to cement their false narrative, to permanently rewrite the facts in their favor. But here's something they didn't expect. You refused to fulfill your allocated role in their screenplay. You did not give them the big public collapse they were hoping for. You did not react in predictable ways that may be distorted and exploited against you. You stood firm, defying all of their expectations. You remained centered, even when it meant suffering in deep stillness that most people could not tolerate. That purposeful decision, that act of divine disobedience, deprived their whole scheme of the oxygen it required to thrive. People are now so repulsed because they realize how close they were to watching a human being mentally wiped in real time, and how purposeful and planned the effort was. They are not only outraged by what transpired, but also disturbed to their core by how systematic, patient, and nasty everything was. You saved more than just your intellect by living without disintegrating. You single-handedly demolished the illusion they had worked so hard to create. And that is why, despite their belief that they were creating your terrible conclusion, all they did was give you a pen to create a more strong, resilient, and wonderful beginning. Number 4. You were the last person they should have chosen for this kind of war. In their hubris and severe lack of insight, they felt they had selected the ideal target. They viewed you as someone they could gradually dismantle, piece by agonizing piece, until nothing remained but silent obedience and complete defeat. Their appraisal of you was terribly incorrect, based on blatant misinterpretations. They misunderstood your natural generosity for a weakness, seeing it as an exploitable vulnerability. They mistook your great tolerance for passivity, expecting you would just accept their abuse without fighting back. They saw your elegant stillness as surrender, implying that you had already accepted your destiny. In their petty, nasty minds, you were easy prey, a vulnerable target for their predatory goals. What they couldn't understand was that you weren't just relying on your own limited human strength. You were and are connected to a source of power well beyond the grasp of human hatred. You are linked to the divine, an unlimited source of grace and resilience that they, in their spiritual blindness, could never see. Their sinister calculations did not include the miraculous endurance you demonstrated. They fully anticipated a brief struggle, a swift and conclusive collapse, and a nice and tidy finale in which you would silently fade into the shadows of humiliation, enabling them to walk away as indisputable winners. They had a meticulous plan for your demise, but they had no idea what to do if you just refused to fall. They had no backup plan for someone who kept rising up and standing, no matter how many severe punches they dealt. The more they pushed you, the more they unintentionally revealed their own great vulnerability. Every unsuccessful effort to ruin you exposed how much they wanted you to crumble in order to legitimize their own warped feeling of power and superiority. Their whole self-worth was based on your failure. They had no idea you'd been a fighter for a long time, walking through storms before they ever knew your name. You've withstood losses, betrayals, and tribulations that would have quickly shattered their comparably feeble souls. Their plots, deceit, and malice were not unique forms of agony for you. It was simply another chapter in the lengthy book of survival that you'd been writing for years. And since you'd previously been through much worse flames, their precisely orchestrated brutality seemed like bothersome background noise rather than the earth-shattering, soul-destroying onslaught they envisaged. They failed to understand a crucial principle. When you function at a higher spiritual frequency, you process assaults differently. You don't see every wound as a cause to quit or a sign of loss. Instead, you interpret it as heavenly confirmation that you are carrying something so important, powerful, and dangerous to the kingdom of evil that it cannot be ignored. And that's exactly what they unintentionally exposed by targeting you. In their effort to degrade you, they revealed how dangerous your mere existence, rising influence, and unwavering tenacity are to their fragile egos and sinister goals. So now they are in the most uncomfortable and helpless situation conceivable, trapped in a conflict they recklessly initiated but have no chance of winning. They started a fire, expecting it to devour you completely. But that fire merely acted as a crucible, removing any leftover impurities and transforming you into a purer, stronger version of yourself. Instead of seeing you fade away into oblivion as they had intended, they are now forced to face the excruciating fact that they have unintentionally made you stronger, more focused, and immeasurably more dangerous to their ambitions than you were before. They chose a battle with a child of God, and they are about to discover the full extent of their error. Number 5. The way you handled it shifted the focus from the scandal to their character. They were completely persuaded that they were the masterminds behind the ideal public spectacle, a scandal so poisonous and devastating that it would forever be associated with your name. Every premeditated maneuver, every skillfully planted falsehood, and every whispered rumor was intended to drag you through the deepest, filthiest muck while they stood at a safe, sanitized distance, expertly seeming to be innocent, uninvolved onlookers. People would remember the tale they told, not the real events that occurred, because it was so expertly produced. They expected the rumors of their smear campaign to follow you like a shadow, affecting how the whole world regarded you from that point on. But the way you held yourself, the absolute elegance and poise you displayed under fire, completely changed the script in ways their narrow imaginations could never have predicted. You just did not respond as they had planned and trained for. You refused to fall into desperate, frenzied defense. You did not provide lengthy, meandering answers that they may dissect and use as further proof of your guilt. You denied them the emotional outbursts, tears, fury, accusations that they expected to verify their story about your fragility. You didn't go on a public rant or try to bring them down in a desperate bid to rescue yourself. Instead, you walked with a supernatural calm and quiet dignity that was so striking, so out of place in the frantic scene they had manufactured, that it caused people to stop and rethink all they had been taught. That uncanny stillness became the first break in their carefully crafted facade. And through that fissure, the irrefutable light of truth started to seep. The more you stayed rooted and grounded in your soul, the more the public's attention shifted away from you and onto them. People began paying closer attention to them. They started to detect tiny but significant irregularities in their conduct. They picked up on the little errors in their ever-changing narrative. They experienced a peculiar, unpleasant pleasure, a spark of wicked delight from the destruction they had caused. What was methodically planned to be a trial against your character gradually and irreversibly evolved into a thorough, forensic study of who they really were. And when people saw the full extent of their deceit, when the mask was finally removed and the horror underneath was exposed, the scandal stopped to be your humiliation and became their lifelong curse. When the event is brought up, the discussion is no longer about what you allegedly did. It is about what they have shown themselves capable of accomplishing. The narrative has evolved from a tale of your supposed failure to a frightening character study on deception, compulsive cruelty, and the horrifying extent a person would go to ruin another human being. The final, cruel irony is that they manufactured the spotlight themselves. They were so focused on humiliating you in public that they didn't notice they were stepping directly into its harsh beam. The guilt they sought to give you, like a poisoned gift, never stayed with you because you simply refused to accept delivery. Instead, the humiliation looped back, like a boomerang, and landed just where it belonged, indelibly scorched into their conscience. And here is the bit that burns them the most in the middle of night. The world is no longer talking about your demise. They're discussing the condition of their soul, the depravity of their choices, and their obvious inability to stand next to your light without being hopelessly, pathetically little. Number 6. You demonstrated that strength does not always announce itself. Sometimes, it just refuses to die. They risked all on a show. A noisy, muddled, dramatic implosion. They urgently wanted you to burst. They wanted you to scream from the rooftops, cry excessively in public, and create a wild spectacle that would serve as the final vindication for every falsehood they had carefully propagated about you behind closed doors. According to their strategic framework, the only way for them to win was to force you to respond in exactly the way they expected and intended. A public collapse was more than simply a bonus. It was the foundation of their whole strategy. Instead of providing them with the dramatic moment they desired, you did something for which they were absolutely unprepared. You remained steady. You refused to give them fireworks. You maintained a deep, deafening quiet. And that stillness hurt harder and exposed them more than any violent scream could. This incredible control was not about pretending you were unharmed. It was not a superficial act of suppressing your feelings or attempting to look strong for the sake of appearances. It was a profoundly spiritual and strategic position. It was the knowledge of understanding that not every war can be won by swinging your sword furiously. Some of the most critical wins are gained by simply allowing the opposition to exhaust themselves, running out of ammo while you stay standing, anchored, and unmoved. Your unwavering unwillingness to be taken down into their chaotic, low-vibrational drama deprived their treachery of the oxygen it required to blaze bright. Without your emotional response to serve as fuel, their whole wicked plot started to suffocate under the weight of its own evil. People often mistake loudness for strength and anger for power. But there is a powerful force in quietness, in silent perseverance, that most people will never grasp. It is the kind of power that does not need to beg for attention or demand an audience. It is a strength that is self-sufficient, self-aware, and does not disintegrate when no one is around to cheer it on. You didn't need to make a big show of your power. You just refused to perish in the storm they had planned to drown you in. That quiet, resolute denial became the most audible and impactful message you could have made. What shook them to their core was the revelation that they had no control over you. They couldn't get you into a public breakdown. They couldn't trick you into self-destruction. Every time you purposefully opted not to respond, you forced them to bear the entire, crushing weight of their own actions with no distractions or spectacular sideshows to hide behind. The stillness they expected to make you seem weak and defeated turned into a flawless, polished mirror, reflecting their own ugliness back at them for the whole world to see. In the end, your calm, unwavering fortitude did more than simply safeguard your soul. It also slowly ruined their approach. They wanted mayhem, but you gave them holy calm. They expected a performance, but you offered them nothing but the slow, torturous unraveling of their own shame. And it is the type of strength that not only survives treachery, but expertly transforms it into the exact tool of their own downfall. If this message speaks to your spirit, if you recognize the truth of these words in your own path, you are not here by chance. You are a member of a group of selected people who have gone through fire and refuse to be burnt. To guarantee that you never miss another word of truth and strength from God Connection, click the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell right now. This path might seem lonely, but it does not have to be. Consider spreading a seed of support for this ministry and assisting us in keeping this light glowing brightly for those who are still lost in the darkness. You may make a $10 gift by clicking the Super Thanks button below the video. Your gift, no matter how large or little, allows us to reach more individuals who need to be reminded of their own unwavering, divine power. Thank you for being an important part of our endeavor. Now let's get to the truth. Number 7. You didn't just lose people, you lost whole illusions about the world. The treachery you experienced cost you far more than simply relationships. It methodically demolished your previous illusions about the basic workings of the universe and the genuine character of the people who inhabit it. Prior to this catastrophic tragedy, you followed a system of unwritten, holy standards that you assumed everyone followed to some extent. Loyalty represented something concrete. Promises had great weight. Friendship has a well-defined limit that it would never pass. But when those you loved and trusted went so far over that line, not just tripping over it, but jumping over it with a cold, calculated lack of hesitation, it wasn't just your heart that shattered. It was the foundation on which you had based your whole concept of mankind. It represented the breakdown of a worldview. The understanding that you were not the only one afflicted added to the gravity of the situation. People who watched it, whether actively participating or observing from a distance, noticed a definite change in the mood. It was as if the collective innocence had been cruelly wrenched away in real time. Those who took pleasure in their abilities to detect danger or deceit were quickly taught a painful and sobering lesson. Evil does not always take the form of a fairy tale villain. Evil might take on the appearance of a buddy who brings you soup while you're unwell. Sometimes it seems to be a mentor who has directed your career. Sometimes it appears like a family member who promised to always have your back. And it is a fact that most people are unwilling to confront unless it is forcefully imposed upon them. Part of the illness in the air sprang from that forced, undesired awareness. The fury was not just about what they did to you. It was also about what their acts showed about the terrible potential that lurks inside a human being when greed, jealousy, or malice are allowed to take control. For many who saw your trauma, it was the first time they genuinely digested the horrifying fact that the same individuals beaming at them across the dinner table might also be covertly plotting their demise. That type of terrible understanding does not disappear easily. It leaves an indelible impression on the psyche. And here's the unchanging truth. Once those underlying illusions are destroyed, they're gone forever. You are capable of forgiveness. You can heal. You may proceed. However, you can never unsee what you have seen. That is why this betrayal had such a profound impact on everyone who saw it, not just you. People's perceptions of moral safety and regularity in their relationships splintered into a million pieces. In its place emerged a more somber, cautious, but ultimately more true truth. Trust should not be given blindly or lightly. And not everyone who promises to support you will be able to do it when it matters most. What you lost was not just individuals, but a whole chapter of your worldview. And, although that loss is very painful, it is also what caused you, and many others, to begin viewing the world for what it really is, rather than what you thought it were. That newfound understanding may seem heavy, but it is the type of weight that sharpens discernment and fortifies your soul, guaranteeing that no one ever surprises you in the same way again. Number 8. They used your existence as a test case and failed miserably. In their ultimate hubris, they saw your life as a cold, impersonal experiment. It was as if you were a project in their laboratory of cruelty, a subject they could control, dissect, and then use as proof for their terrible theory that no one, absolutely no one, could withstand the enormous psychological and social pressure they were going to unleash. Their ultimate purpose was to make you a public example, a live, breathing cautionary tale that would be spoken about for years, a warning to anybody else who dared to carry themselves with too much confidence, integrity, or heavenly light. In their beliefs, after they had humiliated you enough, you would ultimately disintegrate, and they could then point to your wreckage as conclusive proof that no one is really untouchable. Instead of validating their cynical premise, you completely smashed it. What they had methodically planned as a public demonstration of devastation became a real, breathing testimonial to the unfathomable limitations of human brutality when confronted with a divinely strengthened spirit. They grossly miscalculated how deeply planted your soul was, and they entirely ignored the basic reality that certain individuals are born with a spiritual foundation that can withstand the weight of evil. It becomes stronger. It calcifies. It becomes unbreakable. Every savage strike they fired at you, every falsehood they wove, and every friend they turned against you did not result in the collapse they had projected. Instead, each assault showed a level of resistance so great that it humiliated them in front of everyone who was watching their little experiment develop. The reality is, they weren't just assaulting you. They were aiming to make a universal message to everyone else in your shared world. If we can break this one, we can break anyone. That's why their stunning failure burns so much. Instead of exposing your weakness, they unintentionally demonstrated the incredible strength of your determination. Instead of discouraging others, your failure ended up motivating them with your perseverance. What was intended to be the narrative of your downfall became the exact thing that increased your power and established your legacy. Now, the same case study they planned to offer to the world is being investigated, but for a very different and, to them, frightening reason. People aren't discussing how you were destroyed. They are discussing how you refused to bow. They are examining your remarkable ability to stand firm without becoming resentful. They're amazed at how you weathered their most intricate plans without ever reducing yourself to their degraded level. Their biggest strategic error was not assaulting you. It was the naive, arrogant assumption that you could be reduced to a simple victim in their self-serving narrative. You rejected that position and instead became the protagonist of your own tale. You have become live evidence that perseverance has no bounds, and that no amount of focused venom can destroy a soul that is rooted in something really unbreakable. And now, the only thing left to learn from their failed experiment is that the weapon they attempted to use on you would never, ever work on someone with the holy spark of rejection in their soul. Number 9. You made forgiveness seem like a weapon, not a weakness. You did not choose forgiveness because they deserved it. Let it be recognized clearly. You selected it because you refused to let their poison remain and fester in your system. The alternative, carrying a heavy stone of hate, incessantly rehearsing every painful event in your mind, calculating and dreaming about how to harm them back, was precisely what they were hoping for. That was part of their trap. They wanted you to stay in the same dark, low-vibrational area from which they operate, for as long as you remained furious and fixated, they could have some influence and control over your emotional state. Forgiveness was never about giving them peace. It was about regaining your own. The enormous strength of your forgiveness lies in the fact that it was not the meek, timid, doormat type of forgiveness that most people envision. This was a purposeful, intentional, and unwavering demonstration of spiritual sovereignty. You were not making an excuse for what they did. You didn't pretend it didn't matter or hurt. On the contrary, you saw the entire extent of their betrayal, looked it in the eye, and intentionally refused to allow it have the last say over your life and future. This is when the weapon aspect comes into play. By completely letting go of the poison, you sever the final energy thread that connects you to their control. You denied them the profound, sadistic delight of seeing you twisted within, eaten by the same bitterness and hate that flows through their veins. This kind of strong, self-honoring forgiveness is very disconcerting for individuals like them because it entirely eliminates the struggle they had been prepared for and desiring. They anticipated opposition. They expected a lengthy back-and-forth fight of words and wills that would bind you with them forever, keeping them relevant in your life. Instead, you did the unthinkable. You just strolled out of the arena, leaving them to swing wildly at nothing, appearing silly and obsessive. It is quite difficult to continue playing the part of the victorious winner when your intended target no longer considers you a legitimate opponent. And here's something they'll never confess out loud, even to themselves. Your forgiveness enlarged and revealed their smallness. It demonstrated to everyone that, although you had advanced to a higher level of existence, they were still hanging on, stubbornly clutching to old grudges, and attempting to settle scores from a conflict you had already proclaimed ended. It made them seem petty, resentful, and hopelessly lost in their own negativity. Finally, you demonstrated a great spiritual truth. Real forgiveness does not mean letting someone off the hook. It is about ensuring that they do not pull you down into the abyss with them. It is the clean, surgical break that enables you to keep your spirit pure, your thoughts clear, and your future path open to heavenly favors. And in doing so, you not only won the battle, but also ended the war on your own terms. Number 10. You were their darkest secret long before the betrayal. Long before they made their last, obvious move, you were already living rent-free in the darkest, most bitter parts of their thoughts. They may have mastered the character of a supporter, beaming brightly in your face, cheering loudly for your victories, and masterfully portraying a devoted friend or ally. But underneath that carefully crafted facade, a poisonous core of anger was silently and gradually rising. This was neither a rash decision or a random act of malice. This was a long, insidious build-up, a silent, simmering animosity that they cleverly disguised with civility and niceties, patiently waiting for the right time to unleash that latent poison into an open, deadly assault. They never realized, and still don't, that you had picked it up on a spiritual and intuitive level before they did. You may not have had actual proof to back it up, but you could feel the change in energy anytime they were around. You saw how their praises usually appeared to have a slight, backhanded edge. You saw how they were always readily available when anything went wrong in your life, ready to hear the specifics, but oddly missing or subdued when things went wonderfully well. You could feel the rot of envy and jealousy long before it showed itself in their performance. And while they were confident they were duping you with their ruse, you were merely monitoring everything, accumulating spiritual data and biding your time, enabling them to disclose the full scope of their own evil. As a result, by the time the real betrayal occurred, you had not experienced the paralyzing shock they had hoped for. They wanted it to feel like a devastating earthquake that would ruin your universe. But it was more like witnessing a hurricane that had been gathering on the horizon for months, if not years, finally reach landfall. The critical difference was that you had already begun to construct your spiritual and emotional shelter, reinforcing your spirit in preparation, while they naively assumed you would be found standing vulnerable in the open. This is the most unsettling thing for them today, the dawning, frightening knowledge that you saw through them long before they revealed their actual face. It implies that their grand reveal, their huge, dramatic moment of betrayal, was not the masterstroke of brilliance they expected. It was only the last confirmation of a sad reality you had already felt in your soul. And in a fundamental manner, this deprives them of the power they believe they have over you. Their treachery did not change your opinion of them. It just validated your instincts. Their largest and most dangerous error was to underestimate your spiritual discernment. They thought that since you did not face them directly, you were blind and naive. But there is a vast difference between being oblivious and deciding, with great judgment, not to reveal anything until the moment is divinely appointed. You enabled them to feel they had the upper hand, despite the fact that their own bitterness was slowly eating them alive from inside. When the truth eventually came out, it exposed not only what they had done, but also who they had always been. The hardest thing for them now is the chilling realization that you had previously seen it, long before they suspected you had a clue. Number 11. Your pain compelled others to reconsider their own capacity for betrayal. What occurred to you did not elicit simple indignation or pity among those who saw it. It achieved something considerably more profound and uncomfortable. It drove individuals to engage in very intimate and frightening self-reflection. It is incredibly simple to observe a narrative of betrayal from a safe distance and immediately designate the betrayer as an unredeemable monster. It's easy to shake your head in disgust and reassure yourself with the comforting thought, "I would never, ever do something like that." However, when the perpetrator is someone they know, someone they've laughed with, worked with, or perhaps even admired, the entire internal conversation changes. Suddenly, the problem isn't just what that person did. It's what anybody is capable of when confronted with the proper poisonous combination of envy, desperation, pride, or fear. Your suffering served as an unwanted mirror for everyone in your town. People couldn't observe your story without being forced to confront some really difficult questions. What would it take for me to cross a line like that? Have I ever justified a small, dishonest action because it suited my own agenda? Am I truly capable of inflicting that kind of damage on someone if my ego felt sufficiently threatened? This is a level of rigorous self-auditing that most people actively avoid their entire lives because it requires confronting the darker, shadow parts of themselves that they would much rather pretend do not exist. For them, This was more than simply a theoretical or philosophical experiment. Your circumstances made it terrifyingly real. They saw firsthand how swiftly years of dedication might evaporate into nothing. They saw how quickly warmth and companionship could devolve into hate and disdain. They discovered how effectively someone may seem to care while covertly and systematically plotting damage. The betrayal was no longer a distant memory. It was a vivid, breathing demonstration that closeness to someone does not ensure purity of purpose. That knowledge rocked individuals to their core because it forced them to realize that they weren't nearly as brilliant at reading other people or themselves as they had previously thought. Some individuals left watching your story with a renewed and greater appreciation for the enormous weight of their own everyday decisions. They learned that every decision to behave with integrity, particularly when challenged or tempted, is a conscious, intentional choice, not a default setting. Others were genuinely disturbed because, at their most honest times, they recognized fragments of the betrayer's worldview in themselves. They observed how petty, unmanaged resentments and minor jealousies, if allowed to develop, might escalate into something considerably more terrible. That is the hidden, transforming power of what you experienced. It showed not just the nature of your foes, but also the thin, brittle line between morality and greed in everyone watching. You transformed casual spectators into those obliged to confront their own shadows. And, whether they confess it or not, your agony provided them with a new benchmark to measure themselves against, a subtle, strong challenge to never allow jealousy, wrath, or pride to lead them to become the exact thing they loathe. Number 12. They did not only betray you, they declared war on the divine order over your life. What they did to you was so much beyond personal betrayal that the two are hardly comparable. This was never simply about a broken contract, a destroyed opportunity, or a symbolic dagger in the back from someone you trusted. This was a direct, deliberate blow against something immeasurably greater, the divine calling and holy purpose bestowed upon your existence. Your trip is not a random collection of occurrences. It is planned and predetermined. Your job in this life is not self-appointed. It is divinely sanctioned. This important difference implies that the assault launched against you was not limited to you as a person. It was a flagrant act of disobedience against the God who sent you. When individuals, in their ignorance or hubris, cross that hallowed boundary, they unintentionally enter an entirely new domain of repercussions. They are no longer merely dealing with human effects, such as tarnished reputations or strained relationships. They are actively engaged in a spiritual conflict over which they have no control, authority, or ability to prevail. This treachery rocked the whole environment because it was more than just a breach of human trust. It was an effort to disrupt heavenly order. They weren't just attempting to stop you. They were attempting to impede the completion of a divine purpose over which they had no influence. And here's the really scary aspect for them. When someone does that, when they attack an appointed assignment, they're not battling a person. They are, in reality, choosing a conflict with the person's true source of power. That is why the repercussions that have befallen them, and will continue to befall them, often unfold in ways that no human could have predicted. Doors that they were confident would open for them have abruptly and unexpectedly closed. The opportunities they were depending on had strangely slipped through their fingers. Alliances they thought were unbreakable have collapsed suddenly for no apparent reason. This is because challenging a divine assignment is more than simply treading on someone's toes. It is a straight road to divine retribution. You've undoubtedly noted, with astonishment, that some of the most dramatic consequences didn't even need your input. You didn't have to raise a finger to make them pay for their actions. The disintegration of their own lives and goals began spontaneously, as if by an unseen hand. This is because the same hands that attempted to derail your destiny were the identical hands that unintentionally put their own demise in motion. That is why your survival is more than just a testimonial to your own strength. It is irrefutable proof. You are still standing, not because you were competent enough to avoid the strike, but because your position was and is strengthened by a power others cannot see or touch. And every day you go ahead, you are not only proving them incorrect, you are reaffirming to everyone watching that when a life is in accordance with divine order, no treachery, plan, or act of human malice can ever undo what is already written in the skies. They chose to battle heaven rather than simply you while attempting to remove you. And it was a struggle they were bound to lose before it ever started. Number 13. You became the mirror they cannot stand to look into. You were never forced to approach them with a bombardment of furious words. You didn't need to make big announcements or constantly remind people on social media about what they accomplished. Your sheer presence or continuous existence became the ultimate conflict. Every time they see you, alive, healthy, tranquil, and even thriving, it sends an inevitable shock through their conscience, a stream of guilt they can't totally block out, no matter how hard they try. You were the mirror they couldn't stand to look into because you revealed the one thing they'd been desperately trying to avoid, the truth about their own character. It isn't simply about the betrayal anymore. It's about the incredible reality that you survived in a manner they never imagined. The tale they had written in their thoughts was going to conclude with you shattered, resentful, and eternally buried under a mound of guilt. They based their fragile feeling of serenity on the underlying belief that you would not get back up. But here you are, walking, laughing, breathing, and existing, without the crushing weight they attempted to impose on you. And this is what ultimately kills them. Because as long as you stand, their whole story unravels. Your survival is deafening to them. Every new success you achieve, no matter how little, is a trumpet blast declaring their failure. Every day you live your life is a reminder of their inadequacy. Every instant you conduct yourself with elegance and dignity exposes another weakness in the frail wall they've built to defend their own ego. It causes them to recall the dark, calculating lengths they went to shatter you, followed by the terrible realization that none of it was enough. You are live, breathing evidence that their finest attempt still failed, and they cannot undo it. The fact is that you no longer need to remind them of what they did. Every time you enter a room with them, they are compelled to relive it in their thoughts. Every time your name appears in speech. Most terribly, every time they see you having a moment of pleasure, they realize you have healed and moved on without ever needing to apologize. It is a unique kind of mental pain from which they will never really recover, since you have become an inevitable, live witness to their character flaws. They may attempt to physically avoid you, stop you, or direct you to other locations. However, they will never be able to escape the truth that you represent. Their true character has been revealed, and you have persevered. They may attempt to portray a sense of confidence or claim to have moved on, but deep inside, in the quiet regions of their psyche, they know the truth. You didn't simply survive their treachery. You turned it into an undeniable testament to your strength and their weakness. And, whether they confess it or not, you have become live, breathing proof that what they did says much more about them than it ever could or would say about you. That is why the mere sight of you disturbs them so much. You are evidence that they can never, ever rewrite. Number 14. The aftermath proved one thing. You're not just hard to kill, but impossible to replace. The consequence of their acts left more than just wounds. It also left a clear, irrefutable void in the surroundings they forced you to leave. In their arrogance, they imagined that once you left, people would swiftly adapt. They felt that someone else could easily take your place, and that life, work, and relationships would continue without any disturbance. They were disastrously mistaken. Your absence was more than simply a small difference. It shouted. It left a perceptible emptiness, making the whole area seem unbalanced and unstable, as if a key foundation had been forcibly pulled away from underneath it. The fact they had to face was that your roles, whether in relationships, family dynamics, community endeavors, or the workplace, were never simply about what you did. It was always about who you are. You weren't just filling a slot or ticking off items on a to-do list. You were maintaining a complete environment. Your very presence had a stabilizing impact, a quiet, anchoring influence that others, even your opponents, didn't realize or appreciate until it was gone. Now, in your absence, they can see it with excruciating clarity. They discover that the tranquility, productivity, sense of direction, and even pleasure they had taken for granted were all influenced by your spiritual presence. They believed that your departure would finally be their chance to shine, to walk into the limelight. However, it did the exact reverse. It revealed the terrible truth that the brightness they seemed to have was never their own. It was only taken from, or mirrored by, the positive atmosphere you single-handedly maintained. Without you to keep things together, fractures appeared very instantly. Old conflicts have reappeared. The group's chemistry worsened. Everyone realized that removing you had not raised anything. Rather, it had started the process of deconstructing it. And folks aren't only missing you. They are completely reassessing what they thought they knew about the people who drove you out. What makes this even more terrible and humiliating for your betrayers is that your absence affected them not just personally or operationally, but also made them seem little and unimportant. Their huge, sophisticated plot to destroy you not only failed to make them seem better, but also made them appear absolutely superfluous. People began asking risky questions they had never asked before. Why did they ever do that? Things were so much better before. These inquiries sting with the poison of truth because they reveal the reality. You were the asset. You were the glue. You were the unspoken anchor. And now, no matter what or who they attempt to put in your place, it seems empty, cheap, and fake. It's like replacing a pristine, valuable gemstone with a factory-made plastic imitation. The form may be comparable, but the substance, brightness, and inherent worth are just not there. And every clumsy effort to pretend differently just serves as a painful reminder to everyone that the true loss was not a job, a relationship, or a project. The genuine, irreparable loss was yours. And the aftermath demonstrated unequivocally that, although you may have been deceived, rejected, and undervalued, you were never, ever replaceable. Not then, not now, or ever. Ultimately, this narrative was never simply about betrayal. It became incontrovertible, irrefutable evidence that you were designed for something that your adversaries could not build or destroy. Every nasty effort to undermine you simply served to highlight your great depth. Every frantic attempt to delete you made your presence more memorable. They set out to humiliate you, but instead methodically documented their own weakness, insecurity, and spiritual bankruptcy for everyone to see. You went through the most intense fires of their wrath without losing your heavenly form. You survived storms meant to shatter you, only to rise from the ruins sharper, clearer, and incomparably more dangerous to the falsehoods that attempted to define you. And now your mere presence has become a terrifying memory that they seek to obliterate with all their power. You are living evidence that you not only survived, but also became tremendously stronger as a result. The greatest divine irony is that what was supposed to be your terrible conclusion became the most fascinating chapter in your magnificent tale. And today, the lesson serves as a light for anybody watching. When the wrong people attempt to bury you, they are unaware that you are a seed. They just end up putting you in rich soil, forcing you to develop deeper roots. You didn't simply outlast them, you outperformed them. And the heavenly light inside you? It is not going out. Ever. If this message from God Connection resonated deeply with you and you felt every word in your soul, don't keep it to yourself. So many people need to hear it. Hit the subscribe button right now to ensure you never miss another truth like this. If this video speaks to your spirit, please like it. Leave a comment below to share your ideas or a strong testimony. Your tale might be the key that frees someone else. And, most importantly, share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their own unwavering strength. This community thrives when we climb together, therefore let us ensure that no selected one goes it alone. And if you feel compelled to help us carry this light even farther, please consider clicking the Super Thanks button and donating $10. Your contribution keeps this fire going. God bless you.